Hello everyone, welcome back to the Dreamcatchers YouTube channel. Today we have Colette to share her experience as a Stanford alumni as well as working in Boeing now. So Colette, just please give us a brief self-introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your major, and kind of how you got where you are today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Charlie. An honor to be here. Um, so I'll kind of give a little background on my story. I grew up in Southern California. Both my parents, neither one of my parents went to college, but both of them used to be in aviation. So my mom was a Pan Am flight attendant, and then later was a Delta flight attendant. And then my dad, he's from Argentina, and he's an aircraft mechanic for Aerolíneas Argentinas. And then they actually met in an airport. He was driving around her crew, so that's how they got together. So I grew up with this appreciation for aviation. I never really had any engineers in my life, and my parents didn't really have an idea of what an engineer did. So when I first got to college, when I first got to Stanford, I thought I was going to be pre-med. And at the time, about half of my incoming class thought we were going to be pre-med. This was sort of before CS became the most popular major at Stanford. Um, so I think after just a little while talking to older students, my RAs, my TAs, I saw what they were doing, and some of them were doing engineering, and it seemed really cool. I'm a visual thinker. I really like math and physics. And I realized I didn't want to go to school for as long as it would take to be a medical doctor. So engineering just seemed like a really good fit. Um, so I took my first engineering class spring quarter of my freshman year. It again, it fit. And from there on, I thought, okay, this seems like a good path. And pretty shortly after I figured out I wanted to do engineering, I decided I wanted to do mechanical engineering because it's pretty broad. You're not really pigeonholing yourself into one thing. There are lots of industries that require it. And again, visual thinking. I like to know how things work. Um, and then pretty soon after that, I kind of realized, working in aerospace would be kind of a dream. Again, having grown up with two parents that were in aviation at some point. Um, and that was kind of my goal. While I was at Stanford, of course, I took my engineering curriculum, but I did internships over the summer in aerospace companies. For my first two engineering internships, I worked at a rocket engine company in Southern California called Rocketdyne, and that was a lot of fun being in space, the space industry. They were a small company though; they didn't have a lot of programs, so um, it was just they were really dependent upon NASA funding, and the job situation wasn't as stable as I would like. So the next summer, I tried out interning for Boeing, and I'm still here. Love my job at Boeing. I now live in Seattle, um, and I've worked several different jobs within the company. We can go into that more later if you'd like. But I've been at Boeing over 11 years now, and I could see myself staying here for a while. It's just so much interesting stuff to learn, and I get to do really cool stuff for my job.
Awesome. That's great to hear how you went from kind of full circle from aviation and right at the start to being in the industry right now. So, my question is really starting from the start. For Stanford, how'd you get into Stanford? I think that's a burning question that so many students out there have. I mean, it's a huge question that there's not really a right or wrong answer to. But from your take, how do you think you got in, and what do you think really made you stand out when you applied?
Yeah, I mean, the honest answer is a mystery, and I can really only guess at it. I know the admission officers do their best to kind of put the class together like a puzzle, and you could be the most amazing person with amazing accomplishments, but if you don't fit in that puzzle, you're not going to get in that year. So my best guess, I think a lot of the stuff is probably pretty obvious. I had good grades, and good test scores. But I mean, of course, I worked really, really hard to get those. I was a really engaged student. Think, my teachers that had me in their classes, they all knew who I was and that I took learning seriously. I took school seriously. So I would imagine that that made its way into the letters of recommendation. Um, and I think my school counselor probably also had that sense. I would regularly go to see him, and again, he knew how seriously I took it, how hard I worked, and the grades reflected that. Test scores reflected that. Took a challenging course load. None of this is a surprise, really, right? But I think there were probably a couple things that made me stand out. I grew up from a really young age doing ballet. That was my extracurricular, and ballet is really all consuming. I was taking ballet class pretty much every weekday for an hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes longer. And then the entire weekend would be spent rehearsing for whatever show that we were doing. I also did the school dance team for fun on the side. So I was really in depth into dance, particularly ballet. Um, and I think I just think the level of dedication there probably made me stand out. I also worked really hard on my essays. I remember my primary essay that I wrote was about being a ballet dancer and trying to branch out into new forms of dance and how awkward it felt and how my sense of identity was kind of wrapped up in being a classical dancer. So I think something just very specific and um, somewhat unique to me probably helps. So essays, let's see. I think probably honestly my parents' educational background, being a first generation college student, may have given me um, some that they may have noticed that. Um, let's see. I think probably those were the heavy hitters. I mean, I it feels weird saying that because these days I do interviews for Stanford for high school seniors applying, and they just do these amazing things. I've interviewed students that have invented medical devices and stuff, and I'm always so impressed with them. Um, so I mean I didn't do anything like that, but uh, I fear that that wasn't a super satisfying answer. um,
No, it
I
was
think
that's
another
actually
essay that
perfect.
I wrote was, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, 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 not at all. I was just saying it's really interesting to have dance as well as like a big component on top of everything because it's really time consuming. So yeah, please continue. What were you saying with the other essay?
Oh, sure. One of the other essays that I wrote was another aspect of my identity. So I grew up and I spoke Spanish before I spoke English. And eventually, when my parents realized that I had to go to school, they cut me off from Spanish. And I think my dad really regrets that. But I kind of came back to it in high school. So I didn't just take Spanish in high school because I thought it would be, I don't know, easier because it was a requirement. I mean, I guess those things were kind of true, but I took it because I wanted to reconnect with myself. And it's something that I still struggle with today. Learning a language in a classroom is only going to get you so far, but I did have that foundation of having spoken it when I was really little. Um, and it really opened doors to really talk to my own family and make me more comfortable when I visit them, and to travel to Spanish speaking countries, of course, too. But that was another essay that I wrote is what I did to try to move past that language barrier and forget my discomfort with the language, even though I'm not totally fluent. I could get by well enough, and the reconnecting with my family and my own culture is more important than the discomfort.
Yeah, I mean that's really great to hear. That's actually a really moving essay as well on something
Oh, thanks.
very personal. I think that would, be something really reflective of your personality in a college essay. And I wanted to ask you with dance, because I know how time consuming it is, especially from what you said, having to rehearse and practice for so many different things, as well as having that and being an exemplary student at school. How did you balance that? I mean, that's a huge thing as well. There's only 24 hours in a day. So how do you keep yourself balanced between your time consuming extracurriculars and also academic excellence at the same time?
Yeah. I don't know that I was so successful at it. Okay, so on one hand, they do kind of balance each other out because I think having built-in exercise into your schedule, it it does wonders for not only your body but your mind. And um, not that no thinking happens in ballet, it's just that you think a little bit differently when you're in ballet class. When you're trying to pick up choreography, is a lot of muscle memory. You can think more creatively when you're trying to be uh, artistic, when you have an artistic role, for example. Or when you're choreographing, I got to do a little bit of that with dance team. Um, so I think they balance each other out, but the honest answer is that I did not sleep as much as I should have, or as much as I really needed to in high school. And that really continued at Stanford too, but I think I knew I was making that trade. I think your most precious resource in college is, especially at Stanford, is your time and how you're going to allocate it. Um, so I decided I was going to continue dance at Stanford and study engineering, and engineering on its own is a lot. And I decided to squeeze 2 degrees into 5 years. So I did what Stanford calls a coterminal master's degree. So, sleep was the thing that fell by the wayside. So I was sleep deprived a lot of high school and college. I'm not anymore, luckily. But I knew it was temporary, and you know, I was young, my body could handle it. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other takeaway there. I mean, I probably could have been better with my time management. Um, there were times when I procrastinated. There were times when I was too dead tired to do anything. But um, I guess you can't go at 100% forever, indefinitely. So I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to manage everything sometimes. It's very overwhelming. So, no, I totally get it. I think it's a very real thing that a lot of students, especially with a high workload, will experience. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so you mentioned your coach term at Stanford. Can you go into that a little more and explain what that was like? As besides the not getting much sleep.
Yeah. So the co-term program, it's basically just you can stay however much longer, and you can pursue your master's at Stanford. And it's really meant to be like you're stopping there. So you're not going to go get a PhD or anything like that. It's just if you want to do the master's, and it's very common at Stanford to do that in engineering. Um, and not uncommon to do that outside of engineering. For me, it was just a really good deal because I could basically plan it out so that I could put both degrees into 5 years, instead of normally you do your undergrad in 4 years and then go somewhere else and do your master's for two. Um, so you've got kind of the time benefit, and you're not paying for an extra year of tuition and room and board, right? The other advantage to doing a co-term was I was able to get a teaching assistant position for the whole year. So that paid for a lot of it as well. And then the third financial advantage was to um, basically when you come into Boeing with a master's degree, you start at a higher salary. So it ended up really paying for itself quite quickly. So purely from a financial perspective, it made sense to do for me. And then there were a couple of other reasons that I did that. I kind of wanted to go through all of it at once. It's really hard to kind of put it away and go back to school later while you're working. You forget a lot of the specifics because you have been doing on the job training, and you know, you get really specialized eventually, and you sort of fall out of practice with doing problem sets and remembering all of the broad pieces of engineering so that you can draw on them, right? So I wanted to do that while it was all still fresh in my mind. And I was also really used to living like a college student. I mean, it really did feel like a fifth year of college. So you know, I could just continue my lifestyle for another year. I didn't have to get used to a new campus. But in terms of what it was actually like, the fun thing about doing your master's is that you kind of already taken all of the foundational classes. So you've built your foundation, right? And now you kind of get to play. You get to take really cool classes that you just have to have all those foundational classes to understand. So for example, I took an aircraft design class. That was really fun. We got to basically take a clean sheet and you ended up with an airplane by the end of the class, a design. I could take mechatronics, which basically is robotics. But you know, to take that, you have to have a little bit of programming, you have to have a little bit of mechanical design, you have to have a little bit of circuits, all of that stuff, right? So that you can put it all together. So a lot of the classes in my co-term, in my grad year, were kind of those, oh man, this looks really cool, I would love to take this. And I really felt more like an engineer because I was putting things together, and I was, you know, I had way more opportunities to draw on different buckets of knowledge. I also was really drawn to the project classes. That's another reason why I really love Stanford's mechanical engineering program, because it is so hands-on. Stanford has the PRL, which is the Product Realization Lab, and it's a place for students to go to learn how to make things. They have a machine shop, they have, you know, casting, welding, woodworking, anything that you'd want to make something with. And we use that a lot in the ME program. And that's something that I also was really glad to have staying at Stanford. I know not every institution is so fortunate to have that resource and be able to offer so many project classes, hands-on classes. So see what else. Yeah, I just had a lot of fun. It was just nice to be able to extend my time at Stanford, and it just made sense to do from multiple angles.
Awesome. So, first question is, how do you think that Stanford and your experience studying mechanical engineering at Stanford has helped you become an engineer now, and how that reflects in your role as an engineer now? But as an extension of that, how do you think doing your master's as well at Stanford, having that extra year and getting that extra degree, how do you think that was, and how do you think that reflects in your role as an engineer today?
Yeah, so I think the main thing that I got from Stanford is you learn how to think like an engineer. Um, you take, of course, a full suite of classes. You know, there's the thermodynamics and heat transfer track. There's the projects and manufacturing track, right? There's the dynamics and simulation track. And you take all of that, right? But you know, you're probably not going to retain every single detail. I mean, you can always go back and say, oh, okay, I remember how to do this, right? But I learned how to approach problems. So if you're given a problem, you know, what do I know? What tools do I have to work with? How reliable are those tools? Can I solve the problem in different ways? What do I know? What can I assume? What can I reasonably assume? What answer do I expect to get, right? What order of magnitude, what degree of conservatism do I need to put in my answer? What is my goal here? And then, you know, I learn how to work through the problem and get something reasonable, and then decipher whether it's reasonable, and then apply it to the next problem, right? So doing this over and over and over again, you learn how to think like an engineer and you have good problem solving judgment. So I think that was the major answer to your question, which is how did Stanford make me a good engineer? Now, some other more specific things. Stanford's really big on the group projects, and I think that is awesome. Um, we had all sorts of group projects, really starting from an early time in our classes in ME. I think probably starting from that very first class where we built a balsa wood bridge, right? That was an intro to structures and mechanics. Um, and the magic number at Stanford seems to be 4. It's a number that works really well for number of teammates where you can all have a role to fill and you can all learn from each other. Um, and it's not too many cooks in the kitchen. You don't have people standing around idling. And you need each other to get it done, right? And even with problem sets, they encourage you to go to office hours and work together with other students. And in a lot of cases, you need each other to get it done. And the reason I bring that up is that it's really reflective of the real world. Everything in engineering, in I guess post grad, is done in teams. You can't design an airplane by yourself. So learning how to work in a team of engineers, do the project management side of things too. That was really key. And that wasn't even something that was explicit to us at the time. I think looking back on it now, it's like, oh man, those group projects were, you know, it feels like what I'm doing now. So that team dynamic work, working with other engineers, I think that the atmosphere at Stanford, I'm grateful that it was very collaborative rather than competitive. They don't have the attitude where, we want you to take these really hard foundational classes and we're going to weed you out, right? Some institutions do have that because maybe they have too much demand for their majors and they don't have the resources to support it. Again, Stanford, very lucky to have the resources to support the students that want to declare whatever major they want to declare. So it just ended up being very collaborative from the beginning. Let's see. I'm trying to remember the other parts of your question. Oh, my co-term classes. So what jumps to mind right now in my co-term was I took this series called it was at the time ME 331 A and B, Advanced Dynamics and Simulation. So basically the equations of motion and everything that follows from it. So you're learning how to model things that move. It's very mechanical engineering, right? That class ended up being really particularly useful for my job. So I'll go into a little bit what I specifically do at Boeing. So I do aerodynamics engineering. I spent part of my time at Boeing doing stability and control. So I would model how the airplane moves and how it responds to outside forces, whether it's atmospheric, ground effects, or pilot inputs, things like that. So I worked on the simulator. I also did some flight tests, looked at data for flight tests in service of certification. And then I did a little bit of product development, wind tunnel testing. But again, we're looking at the data and we're using it for to refine the airplane design or to inform the design. So I think having taken that advanced dynamics series, shout out to Paul Mittigi, who was my advisor at Stanford. He teaches that class still. That actually really helps because the way we model our airplanes that way too. We have a simulator, and that's what I worked on, right? So knowing how to translate forces and moments into a working, useful simulation of our product. That was a pretty direct correlation, and I'm really glad I took that class. I still have the textbooks and everything, so occasionally I'll go back and look at them and reference. But I think again, the ability to think that way, that's what I carried forward.
Great, and that's actually really interesting to see that you got to use, you still get to use the same textbook that you learned from class in your job now. That's really cool how that worked out. Um, so I know you
Yeah.
mentioned your job at Boeing, as well as the fact that you kind of got it from an internship, you carried forward an internship that you had in Stanford, and you also mentioned a previous internship. So tell us a bit more about your experience with internships and how you got went from your first internship to your internship at Boeing, as well as to where you are at Boeing now.
Yeah, so my first engineering internship and second, again, this company called Rocketdyne. They at the time were owned by Pratt and Whitney. They're now owned by Aerojet. Um, they do really cool stuff. They make rocket engines. I got that internship through an organization called Inroads, and they are their website is just inroads.org, and their mission is to help underrepresented students. So, students who first generation, underrepresented minorities, women in STEM, things like that, to help them get placed in engineering internships. So that was a really great organization because they really worked with me on how to craft my resume, professional development skills, like how to do informational interviews, how to show up at a job, when you've never had a corporate job before, and how to negotiate, raises ultimately down the line, maybe after your internship, but later, how to think about benefits and things like that. So they gave me all that training. And then they also, according to my interests, matched me with that internship at Rocketdyne. So that was pretty direct. I just applied inroads.org. It was kind of a milder version of a college application. We basically just sent transcripts and you write. Hey, Charlie, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can. I can't see you though. Hopefully you
Yeah,
didn't lose that recording.
I hope not. It looks like it's still going, so I think we should
Okay.
be fine. So sorry about that. It's just kicked me out of the meeting. Um, yeah,
Oh no. Okay.
please
Well,
just
hopefully you
take
didn't
off where
lose
you
it.
were.
If not, we can try to reschedule and maybe backtrack and maybe I'll do it better
Okay.
next time. So,
No, no, no.
um,
This is all my Wi-Fi over here. I'm sorry about that. Well, I'll just let you
oh,
continue
that's
because it
okay.
looks like it's still
Um,
going, so I think it should be fine.
sure. Okay. Okay. Hopefully that all took. Okay. So inroads, right? Um, Yeah, so I applied to that internship through Inroads. I will also put in a plug for Stanford's Career Center. They are excellent. The people there, I work with them now because I recruit for Boeing. They want to help students and they want, you can go in and have them help you with a resume. You can do mock interviews. Those mock interviews are awesome. They will help you figure out how to optimize your career fair experience, how to dress, how many people to talk to, what to ask, things like that. What are you interested in, which career fairs you should go to. So that's another resource that's really great. As is the Haas Center for Public Service. I've known people who've gotten versions of internships through that as well. One of my classmates, I remember, he went to the Haas Center and they paired him with mechanic's office in Bolivia, and he was a car mechanic in Bolivia for a summer, and his Spanish got really good. So, yeah, so just I guess the resources at your disposal are important to take stock of. I think Inroads still exists, so that's something else to look into. So that was my first two internships, right? So then I had 2 summers of engineering under my belt, and now I had a solid engineering resume at that point. Plus, I had, of course, all of the classes that I'd taken and projects that I'd done in those classes. So thank you, Stanford, for all those project classes. And that's a pretty solid resume, right? So at that point, between or my, let's see, my junior year, I went to Stanford's Fall Career Fair and I went to the Boeing booth and I handed them my resume. And I had actually applied online for their on-campus interviews, and I went up to them with my resume, and I almost didn't go because it was raining that day. I was like, well, I guess I could always just go back to Rocketdyne or try NASA or something. But Boeing felt like a little bit of a Hail Mary. But they never responded to my online application. So anyway, I go and I hand them my resume. I didn't know it at the time, but the guy I handed my resume to was a vice president, and he used to work at Rocketdyne and for 25 years. And he looks at it, he's like, "Wow, you worked at Rocketdyne for 2." Hey,
I'm so
I'll
sorry,
just
Colette.
continue.
Yeah, just
It's
keep
okay, it's
going,
not your
please.
fault. No, I just hope that you still have the recording. Um, okay,
Okay,
anyway,
yeah.
so like they gave me an interview on campus because at the time they were doing on-campus interviews for both internships and entry level. And thankfully I had done some mock interviews at the Career Center. So I had kind of gotten to the top of that asymptote of, I've struggled with all of the interview stuff for careers, and I polished my kind of STAR format. I don't know if you're familiar with STAR format interviewing, but that's situation, task, action, result. So it's like a way to frame your answers. So I had that practiced, right? So the interview it went fine, and that's how I got my internship at Boeing. So I came for the summer, did my internship. It was a lot of fun. I knew it was a company that I could see myself working at for a really long time, potentially my entire career. And then I came back into a rotation program. Um, and that rotation program was 2 years long. And I did one of my rotations in stability and control, and that's how I ended up there. So
Gotcha.
that's
So,
kind of how I got all of the pieces.
and you've just continued from there, right? In Boeing?
Pretty much. I've done several different related roles in aerodynamics. So again, like the simulation, the flight testing, the certification, um, went over to product development and wind tunnel testing, did a little bit of defense work in stability and control, did some flight test analysis work, writing test plans and things like that. So all different flavors of aerodynamics, and not everybody does that. Some people are really specific and they want to get super in depth into one thing, or they will try completely different career paths. Like they'll go into aerodynamics performance and then they'll move into marketing, right? Which is not an engineering role. And then maybe they'll go into management. So I've done something a little bit of a hybrid for those two, which is do things that really relate to each other. And I think that's really helped a career. For me, there are just a lot of carryovers. Every time I've gone to a new aerodynamics group, I've carried with me skills. So for example, in my current group, it's a product development group, and we didn't really have the capability of using the aircraft simulator. It wasn't something that was used, but I brought that in, and now we can apply it to early product development studies, things like that. And I think it also helped me during COVID in 2020 when Boeing did a lot of layoffs. I was able to go from commercial, where nobody was buying airplanes and people were being laid off. I was able to kind of go to defense and get in a lifeboat of sorts. And then I was able to come back later. So it gave me some job security as well. Um, and I've gotten to do a lot of cool stuff. I think my passion is probably testing. So hands-on, just you're up on your feet a lot. You're looking at data, or everything's real time. There's some travel involved. The wind tunnel we use is in the UK, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, and I've kind of followed my interests. Like, okay, I would love to do some flight testing. I would love to do some wind tunnel testing. I would love to learn more about this, and do a rotation there and things like that. So yeah, I guess I have kind of continued that path.
Well, it's so interesting to see how, like you mentioned, everything, like different things, different roles you've done in Boeing have connected to each other, and you've taken parts from there as well as from Stanford. And it's also so cool how it's just full circle from your parents, all the way back with that influence from aviation, right from the start. That's so amazing. And I guess as a final question that I have for you, and this is a really broad and vague question, you take it however you want. For aspiring students who are interested in getting into engineering or mechanical engineering or aerospace engineering, who are high schools right now or looking to get into Stanford, sort of broadly, what advice would you have if you could tell them one thing? What would that one thing be? What would your advice be to them?
Yeah. So before I get to the advice, I will say good on you for already knowing that you want to do that because I didn't. So that's awesome. I think that's a great place to start is where you're interested, right? I think take stock of the resources around you, right? If there are programs, a lot of them can be virtual. I know NASA has virtual programs online for high schoolers, right? Um, or places you can go visit. Like here in Seattle, we have the Museum of Flight. We're very lucky to have that. You can go visit. They have free nights to go. There are programs there for students that want to do aerospace engineering. Look at programs that your school has, or maybe neighboring schools. Libraries sometimes have really great resources, and you can start with the librarian. They can start to point you to things.